Few things have wasted more time for use in the Western world than video games and illicit drugs. They have run parallel and even intersected from the earliest days of Pong in the 1970s. Back in the decade of disco and cocaine, drug culture began to be pushed underground while video game culture started its meteoric rise into the mainstream. Both have been blamed for the corruption of youth, acts of violence, and sexual depravity. Drug culture and video games have indeed gone hand in hand ever since. The offices of Atari in the late 1970s and early 1980s were legendary for the programmers' use of illicit drugs. Video arcades, which were popular gathering spots for the youth of the day, were of course a ripe market for the drug trade. And of course, who could forget the official government warning against the use of illegal drugs that graced the screens of arcade games throughout the late 1980s and the 1990s. In this video, I will explore the references to drug culture in video games, whether it's intentional or not. I will also briefly compare and contrast video game culture and drug culture. Let's start with the bizarre and downright psychedelic imagery of video games for the NES, the Super Nintendo, and the Genesis. But first, let's do a brief review of the history of video game culture and drug culture in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. The 1970s saw illicit drugs and video games become entrenched in popular American culture. Drugs, already established as a favorite pastime of youth thanks to the hippie counterculture of the 1960s, had become mainstream. Marijuana and LSD had dominated the first half of the decade, while more dangerous and addictive substances such as cocaine and heroin became more in vogue in the latter, thanks to shell-shock veterans returning from Vietnam and the dreaded phenomenon known as disco. Meanwhile, thanks to Nolan Bushnell, the video game industry was conceived and began its meteoric rise. Bushnell, as all serious gamers know, created the first arcade cabinet with computer space, based on the game Space War, which was the first known video game. Bushnell successfully ported the game that was available on the prohibitively expensive computer systems that only the engineering departments of major universities could afford. Soon afterward, he helped create Pong, the first video game smash hit. With that, he launched his company Atari, that was notorious for drug use, often during work hours. Atari programmers would smoke joints on coffee breaks, have keg parties on Fridays after the workday had ended, and employed rebels who experimented with LSD, such as a young Steve Jobs. Nolan Bushnell basically birthed video game culture, the Silicon Valley business model, and arguably the counterculture that is today known as the hipster. By the 1980s, drugs had become a real societal menace, which had led President Ronald Reagan to declare the use of illicit drugs a threat to national security. The war on drugs was born. Around this time, Atari was in crisis, as was the entire video game industry. Gone were the cocaine-fueled hot tub parties at Bushnell's back patio, the glamour of disco's hedonism, and over 700,000 Atari 2600 game cartridges as they were buried forever in a New Mexico landfill. America was now faced with crack cocaine and AIDS. It seemed that the party was over. The saving grace of video games came about in 1983 with the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Founded in 1889 as a playing card company, Nintendo had essentially brought the video game industry back from the dead. Although the moral panic around drugs was at a fever pitch, one can only wonder what kind of influence drugs had on the video games of the era. The NES had some weird games, and that's being discreet. Weird doesn't even do these games justice. They were psychedelic, they were trippy, they were fucking far out, man. There were early examples of drug innuendo in video games than the weirdness that came from the NES for sure, the most well-known of which was Namco's Pac-Man. After all, it was a disembodied yellowhead devouring pills and chasing ghosts. Ghosts? Sounds like the shadow monsters you see after a long bender on uppers. Later on, with the advent of Super Mario Bros. Series of games, the trippiness was coming on full force. What can I say? Mario is addicted to mushrooms. He fights anthropomorphic turtles with wings. Later on, he throws turnips at robed dwarves and rides around on a dinosaur that is a compulsive eater. In the second installment of Super Mario World, Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, Yoshi, herself, gets in on the hedonism and gets high as a kite from psychotropic spores. These are just the obvious examples. There's tons of others. In Kabuki Quantum Fighter, you kill space alien robots by banging your head and whipping them with your hair. That is metal as fuck! How about Samurai Zombie Nation? Another disembodied head. I'm seeing a pattern here. Flying around New York City and destroying everything in sight. Other video games on competing systems toyed with your head like a bad batch of peyote tea. On the Sega Genesis, Sonic the Hedgehog was a thinly veiled endorsement of performance-enhancing drugs. He was a blue hedgehog. On meth. The Earthworm Jim games on multiple platforms were weird as hell. And in the Seek, each level ended with a cow congratulating you by saying, "Well done." Yeah, I'm fucking done. But not yet! Then there were the games based on popular franchises. Scooby-Doo and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. All the compulsive eating and the paranoia? Yeah, these guys are baked. Do you like a little mysticism rolled up with your Philly blunt wraps? Get yourself the creeps with Taboo the Sixth Sense. Do you want to know what it's like to wake up with amnesia after a potential case of date rape? Play Deja Vu. I mean, it's obvious. Even though the Reagan administration launched the war on drugs, even though every arcade machine by the late 1980s had the FBI "Winners Don't Use Drugs" seal on their load screen, these games had some serious psychedelic overtones. These programmers were clearly high. What do you think, Jesus?
Well, not necessarily. You see, my son, you have to remember that most of these games were coded by Japanese programmers. The bizarre visuals and quirky plots of these games could simply be attributed to the differences in culture from east to west. So what seems strange to an American like yourself is likely just a reflection of Japanese humor that gets lost in translation. Did you know that statistically, the rate of drug abuse in Japan in the 1980s was among the lowest in the entire world?
Good point. Wait a minute. I'm an atheist and I'm talking to Jesus. Man, I'm fucking stoned. That's it. I need to straighten up and fly right. I need to stop playing these spaced out games. Time to switch to something that has a more sobering message. How about I try Wrath of the Black Mana? In this game, you play the role of a ninja known as Mana. He is told by some mysterious old guy, presumably his sensei, that children are being kidnapped in New York City. So you start the game and are presented with an extremely awkward select screen, which apparently allows you to select your ninja magic. I still don't know how it works. Anyway, the gameplay is tedious. The controls are okay, and Mana moves with all the speed and grace that, well, you would absolutely not expect from a ninja. So you walk around killing enemies with their throwing stars and special attacks, if you can get them to work, and occasionally find notes. The first note tells you that the man in red knows something. Each time you encounter a red thug, you can grab him by the neck and enter a boring-ass cutscene. Trust me, these guys don't know shit about fuck. The first level drags on forever. You rescue kids that tell you to shoot walls and find secret doors, which are never fucking there. You can't even avoid walking around these red dudes. They practically leap into your arms. Finally, after wandering around aimlessly for about 20 minutes, you encounter the ironically named Tiny, the first level boss. Holy shit. You thought the guys in the Fist of the North Star movie were impossibly huge? This guy is like 800 feet tall. The stupidest thing about this game is the anti-drug message was tacked on, sort of as an afterthought. After about the fourth kid or so that you rescue, Manta deduces that the whole thing is drug-related. Really? How did he come to this conclusion? None of the red men mention drugs. You never see anyone using, manufacturing, or smuggling drugs. There is literally no evidence of drugs anywhere in the entire level. But Mana says it's obviously drugs. You know what? Forget this stupid game. I'm playing something else. How about Narc? That ought to scare me straight. The arcade hit was one of the earliest blood and gore games, but the gratuitous violence was okay because you're murdering druggies, right? It was ported to numerous systems, but none of them lived up to the quality of the coin-op machine. I can play the Commodore 64 version, I guess.
Shamus. Oh yeah. Take off that spacesuit. Huh? What? Is it loaded yet?
Okay, this is taking too long. I'll play the NES version instead. Ooh, this load screen looks promising. Those graphics. Ugh. Well, the game plays pretty much just like the arcade, except the controls suck ass. A shoots, that's easy enough. B crouches, but how do I fire my rocket launcher? A and B? Nope, that jumps. Guess what? You have to roll your finger from B to A to fire a missile, but half the time that makes you jump and you missed your target. Wow.
Alright, so I'm an idiot. So it turns out in NARC, if you, and I'll show you here on my USB controller, because I play emulators, because I'm poor, if you tap the fire button quickly, that's what fires your rocket launcher. If you roll, yeah, the rolling from B to A, whatever, that's not how it works. So I just wanted to correct that. And back to the video.
Just like the arcade, you can go around and arrest bad guys for big bonus points, but it's just easier to murder every motherfucker in sight. Just like the cops do in the real world today, I guess, huh? Oh, come on! Cops blew up a fucking baby. That actually happened. Don't you pay any attention to the news? Anyway, you go from level to level busting, killing druggies with guns and shooting dogs. But guess what? When you shoot a dog in the NES version, it doesn't die. It turns into an adorable puppy. Isn't that just the cutest darn thing you ever did see? This game is so paternalistic. Drugs are bad, drinking is bad, porn is bad, but blowing up a motherfucker with a rocket launcher? Just as long as you're not getting high and jacking off. So there you have it. Drugs and video games. They're not really directly connected to each other, but they have run parallel to each other in our popular culture in many ways. Both have been blamed for corrupting our youth. Both have been blamed for inciting violence. Both have been shown to be addictive. Look, addiction is a serious problem, and if you or anyone you know is suffering from it, get help immediately. No one wants to end up homeless, in jail, or dead. Certain drugs are best left alone, but the science backs it up. No single drug instantly triggers addiction. A lot of people can try smoking meth, crack, or heroin and never do it again. Not all drugs are the same. Some are basically harmless. Marijuana. If we look at drugs rationally, throwing every cop and every piece of military equipment that taxpayer money can buy at drug culture is not helping anyone. 30+ years of the war on drugs have shown us that. All it is doing is creating a prison industry and an arms race among various police departments throughout our country. And when you handle a problem that way, we all suffer. Our freedom suffers. As Abraham Maslow said in the 1966 book, The Psychology of Science, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That is exactly how we have reacted to drug culture, and that is why we are less free today. Because we have carried that philosophy over into everything else in our lives that we perceive as being dangerous. War on terror, anyone? This is one of the greatest ills of our society. You do not cure an ailment by killing the patient. We need to approach our problems on a case-by-case basis using reason and logic. And taking a break from worrying about the state of the world to play some video games once in a while would help too.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed my video, please like and subscribe. Bye-bye.